Thanks for listening to the Covenant Church podcast. We hope this message is encouraging to you, inspiring, and helps you take your next step with Jesus. Thanks for listening. Now let's check it out.
This is an incredibly significant series because it addresses a question that we're all faced with in life. In fact, for some of you, it may be a question that you deal with every single day. And the question is, who is Jesus? Now, for some of you, you grew up in church, and maybe that's a question that you answered long ago. Maybe you feel like it's just an overly simple question, but wherever you are in that spectrum, you have to understand that some of Jesus's closest friends, which we call the disciples, Jesus's closest friends even wrestled with this understanding and this question of who is Jesus. Now, bear in mind that these were some of the people who witnessed the incredible miracles of Jesus. They were the ones who heard all of his teachings. They were part of his signs and wonders. They were the people who even saw his death and resurrection. And yet they wrestled with this question of who is Jesus? And we know that because there is at one point, Jesus asks them, hey, who do the crowd say that I am? And it's one of those kind of comedic moments where you can only imagine that they didn't have the right answer. And so they're kind of looking every which way for the right answer. And they begin to kind of relay what the guesses of the people are. But then Jesus turns it to them and he says, no. Who do you say that I am? And how you answer that question of who is Jesus, it will dictate so many things in your life. It will dictate what you believe. It will dictate how you live. It will help you to understand the world and interpret life events. And here's the really great thing is that Jesus didn't leave us to speculate. He didn't leave us to kind of question who he was and who he is as if it was the old board game Clue. If you remember that old board game Clue where you had to figure out who did it and where and with what, right? He doesn't leave us to question these kinds of things. He doesn't leave it open to interpretation or speculation. Jesus is very clear about who he is, what he came to do, and why it matters to you. So I want to launch into today's message with a question. So wherever you are and however you're joining us, the question that I want to begin with is, what was your greatest fear as a child? I want you to kind of think back on that. What was your greatest fear as a child? If you're online today, maybe you want to type your greatest fear into the chat box, or maybe if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you put it in the comments, or if you're listening later in the week, a great opportunity would be to put that on the YouTube channel, to put that in the comments below. What was your greatest fear as a child? Maybe it was a fear of abandonment. Maybe it was a fear of spiders. Maybe it was a fear of what was it that actually was in the closet. Or maybe you had a fear of losing a tooth. I had that for a little while, right? What was your greatest fear as a child? When I was growing up, my greatest fear was the dark. Anybody else have your greatest fear was of the dark when you were growing up? I mean, that was totally me. Now, when I grew up in a log cabin. And actually, my parents built it before I was born. I think we actually have a picture of it when I grew up. Yep, that's the house that I grew up in. And actually, when I see that picture, it makes me think that maybe I need to start this by saying, like, back in my day. I don't know why, but back in my day, this particular house had a basement. And it was not a fancy, like, daylight basement. As you could see from that picture, most of the basement was underground. And because it was underground, it meant that there was then no windows, which means that there was no natural light. And for a period of my childhood, our playroom was in the basement. And you would think, I'm starting to get scared now. The lights are going down, right? I'm getting kind of scared talking about this. But the playroom was in the basement. And you would think that for somebody who was afraid of the dark, that would be terrifying. And it was. But the playroom in the dark basement is what had X-Men and G.I. Joe action figures, and I was only able to go down there because there were lights. That as you were able to stand at the top of the steps going into the basement, you could turn the lights on and find your way and go down. And when you got to the bottom, you were able to turn the lights on into the playroom, and you were okay. It was fine. But what made every excursion into the basement harrowing was when you were ready to go. Because then that meant that you had to go and you had to turn the lights off and you had to put your back to the darkness. Absolutely terrifying. And I remember very vividly standing at the bottom of the basement steps, like psyching myself up like an Olympic sprinter. I felt like I was like, Michael Johnson or Usain Bolt in the starting blocks, because I knew that the minute that I hit that switch, I had to sprint up those 16 steps in order to flee the darkness. That's how afraid I was. I was so afraid of the darkness that I would skip steps all the way up, believing that there had to be something chasing me. There was probably something pursuing me, and I would get to the top of the steps and I would turn that last light off and I would slam the door. That's how afraid of the dark I was. And when I think back on my childhood, I wonder, what was it really about my fear of the darkness? What was it that really made me afraid? Because the reality is that any of us understand that we turn the lights off, everything's just the same as if when you turn the lights on. So what was it about my fear of the darkness? And when I think back on it, it was a fear of what was in the darkness. I didn't know if maybe there was a clown in the darkness. Some of y'all are already kind of getting uncomfortable when I say that. Clown in the darkness? Maybe it's a monster or a bad person. I don't know. But it was always, I think my fear of the darkness stemmed from a fear of what was in the darkness. And now when I think about a fear of the darkness, I'm not afraid of what's in the darkness. Instead, I'm afraid of what's not in the darkness. You see, I believe the thing I was afraid of as a child was the presence of something or someone. But now when I begin to think about a fear of the darkness, perhaps my great fear should have been the absence of everything. Now, let me back up in case I lost you, okay? All civilizations, people everywhere throughout the history of the world and humankind have had an understanding of this dichotomy between light and darkness, where it originated from and what light and darkness represent. In our Judeo-Christian faith, we have a particular insight into the origin of light and darkness. Way back in the book of Genesis, there was an ancient account of how light and darkness came into existence. And this is what that ancient account says. In Genesis chapter 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, the earth was formless and what? What does it say? Empty. It was empty. And it says, "Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness." You see, in the beginning, there was darkness. And in the darkness, there was nothing. There was quite literally no thing in the darkness. In the darkness, there was no life. In the darkness, there was no purpose. In the darkness, there was no hope. So we might say it this way. We might say darkness is devoid of life, purpose, and hope. If you think back on biology, on natural plant life, what you have to remember is that every living thing requires light. That plants require light in order to grow and in order to feed animals. And in order for those animals to be fed, in order for us to enjoy things like prime rib and pork tenderloin medallions and chicken tenders or life, there has to first be light. And so in the darkness, there can be no life. And if there's no life, then there's no sense of purpose. And similarly, in the darkness, there's no hope. There's no hope. because the darkness crushes our spirit and our will to live. It's one of the cruelest things about solitary confinement in prisons, of living in darkness. It crushes hope. And this is the way that the world was, dark. But then suddenly, God said, let there be light. Let there be light. And what does he say about the light? He says that the light is good. Why is it good? Well, it's good because from that light springs forth life. And from that light springs forth purpose and hope. And he says that it's good, meaning that if light is good, then darkness is not. The darkness is not good. Now, listen, that's a very cosmic perspective, but the same truth is evident in our personal lives. We understand light and darkness as a metaphor for light being right living and darkness being not right living. One's good, one is not good. And you know this. You just watch any TV show or movie where there's violence or immorality, and people ask you, they were like, well, was it any good? And you kind of go, well, yeah, it was good, but you got to understand it's dark. Because we all understand this dichotomy of light and darkness and what it represents. So here's my question for you. Are you struggling in the darkness today? Or are you living in the light? Jesus, one of Jesus's closest friends was a man named John. And John wrote an account of Jesus's life and ministry and death and resurrection. We call it a gospel. And in John's gospel, there's a dominant theme that runs throughout, and it's this theme of light and darkness. It's a thread that runs from start to finish. In fact, he begins his gospel with these words from John chapter 1. He writes, "In the beginning was the Word." In the beginning, now this sounds familiar, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning, and everything came into being through the Word. And without the Word, nothing came into being. What came into being through the Word was life, and the life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. John's gospel begins in a similar manner as that of Genesis, except for what John wants you to know is that the light isn't something, that the light is someone, and his name is Jesus. In John's gospel, Jesus shares 7 statements to clearly answer the question of who is Jesus. And so Jesus, in his own words, helps us to understand who he is and why he matters to you and to me. And so Jesus, in his own words, says in John chapter 8, verse 12, these incredible words for us today. "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The impact here is that we don't have to live in darkness. We don't have to live the way that it was. We don't have to live in darkness. Jesus came to change things, to redeem the bleak reality of darkness. He is the light of the world. He came to offer life and purpose and hope. It's an offer, but that means that it's also a choice. I don't believe any of us want to live without any of these things. Life, purpose, hope, peace. We don't want to live without any of these things. I don't believe any of us want to live in darkness, whatever that looks like in your life. No one wants to struggle with secrets. Nobody wants to struggle with shame. Nobody wants to wrestle with their shortcomings. Jesus offers a light that has the ability to change your heart in your life. But it's an offer, which means that there's a choice. And listen, we're inundated with offers every day. And whether that's you open your inbox or your mailbox, there's offers for you. Offers for you to buy this for less. offers for you to purchase the extended warranty for your vehicle. Those come as calls though, right? You know, opportunities and offers to eat healthy, lose 10 pounds in 10 minutes, you know. We get all these kinds of offers to save money, to live responsibly, to consolidate your loans. We all have choices to make. We all have offers before us, opportunities to live differently, to make a change, to be different. Jesus came to impact your life and your eternity in a profound way. And yet we struggle with this offer. We're as dismissive about following the light of the world or choosing to live in darkness. We're as dismissive about this offer as we are with that extended car warranty. Why? What is it that keeps us so attracted to living in darkness? What is it that keeps us held back from the light of Jesus and the light of the world? Two things that keep us living in darkness, if you're taking notes today. The first is the things that we've done. When it comes to the way that we live or the mistakes that we've made, there's an element of shame or embarrassment or disgrace or that accompanies our actions or behaviors. Maybe it's shame and maybe it's embarrassment from a struggle with pornography or lies. Or maybe it's something that you've done, like maybe there's been adultery or cheating has happened to you. Maybe you've been a part of that. For some of you, it may be the shame of overeating or lying about your finances or an addiction or something that we said or did. And what happens is that rather than confiding in somebody else over the things that we struggle with or the things that we've done, rather than seeking out somebody else to help share these things and confess these things to, we instead choose to live with our shame and embarrassment. We choose to just keep doing what we're doing. And so it's the things that we've done that keep us living in darkness. We choose to remain in darkness when we hide the things that we've done. For some of you, you may be hiding something on your phone right now. And even me just mentioning that just begins to stir some feelings of discomfort or shame. Maybe you're holding on to a secret from your past that you've had a hard time sharing with your husband or significant other. Maybe it's a secret motive or desire. But listen, we all know that feeling because we've all held secrets, we've all held back, we've all tried to hide things. And what we know is that feeling of living in darkness, of holding on to the darkness, it consumes us. It creates anxiety and stress in your life. It puts a strain on your relationships. It makes everything uncomfortable. You know that. The things that we've done keep us living in darkness. And what you may not realize is that it's keeping you from the life that Jesus wants for you. The psalmist writes in Psalm 38, "My health is broken because of my sins." What is he saying? That I am broken because of the darkness that I'm living in. My guilt overwhelms me. It is a burden too heavy to bear. And some of you can relate. Some of you can relate. You're joining us today carrying around some heavy burdens, some secrets or shame from the things that you've done. And what you're allowing your past to do is to hold you back from something greater. Some of you have yet to even recognize that your sins or your shortcomings or your struggles are taking its toll, not just on your marriage or on your relationships, but also on your health and on your life. You're continuing to live in darkness because of the things that you've done. And you don't realize that what you're sacrificing by choosing the darkness over the light. So naturally, one of the things that holds us back, that keeps us in darkness, are the things that we've done. The second thing is the lies we believe. If it's not the things that we've done that keeps us living in darkness, it's the lies that we believe. We often deceive ourselves by thinking things like, well, hey, if they knew me, if they really knew me, then they wouldn't like me. We cling to lies, or we believe that the darkness of our lives isn't really a big deal. Well, doesn't everybody have secrets? Come on. There's nobody who doesn't have secrets. What's the harm in keeping that from them? Or sometimes we deceive ourselves into believing that, well, they're better off if they don't know. Keeps us held back in darkness. One of the lies that we often believe, and I run into this all the time, and sometimes I find myself guilty of this, is mistakenly believing that we're good. Hey, how's it going? You doing all right? Yeah, we're good. How's your wife? Good. The family's good? Yeah, good. How's work? Oh, it's good. It's all good. Everything's good. And for many people, it is good. But for a lot of people, your life is unraveling. And it's a lie that you just tell yourself that I'm good because you just need to keep moving forward. But what we don't recognize is it's the lies that we believe that keep us held back in darkness. And one of the things that I also want to confront in this idea of that you're good or that we're good is that Jesus didn't come so that your life could be good. He says later in John's gospel, I came that they may have life and life to the fullest. That's not just a good life. That's a full life. That's an incredible life. That's a spectacular life. Don't settle for good and don't believe the lie that good is good enough. Sometimes the lies that we believe that keep us in darkness is the belief that our identity is tied to what we've done. And we do this from time to time. We believe that I am what I did. Well, I did something bad, so I must be bad. I failed, therefore I am a failure. The lies keep us living in darkness, tied to our shortcomings or believing that we're unworthy of something better, greater, or more. But here's the thing that we all have to recognize. We have to understand that those are lies and that by its nature, they're not true. What's important to recognize is that those lies that keep you in darkness are not from God. This is not a word from God that keeps you humble. It's not a word like that. These lies are not from God. In fact, Jesus says this about the root of such lies. He says, the devil was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. You need to know who's calling you with those lies. So that way, when you see the area code and you recognize that that is an out of area number, that you can hit the red X, you can decline the call, and you can keep on believing the truth. Jesus came to give you life. By contrast, the enemy seeks only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. To steal your purpose, to kill your hope, to destroy your life. The enemy wants nothing more than for you to keep living in darkness. But here's the great news. The great news is that just as God created the light in Genesis as an alternative to the darkness, Jesus as the light of the world offers us two ways to keep from darkness ourselves, to keep us living in light, focused on the light. The first is, if you're taking notes, faith in Jesus. The primary way that we push back the darkness is through faith. Faith in Jesus gives you a compass which gives you direction. If you're living in darkness, if your life lacks purpose and hope, if you're not going, I'm going to just tell you that you're not going to find your way out of it on your own. The problem with darkness is that it's very disorienting. You know this if you've ever woken up in a very dark place and you're like, where am I? I don't even remember where I am. Darkness is very disorienting. You can never find your bearings or get your direction and find your way. But in Jesus changes that. It's the light switch that instantly provides light. And what it does then is it provides life. I don't care how stubborn or prideful you are. There's no one who wants to live in darkness. There's no one who wants to have their lives controlled by alcohol or drugs. There's no one who wants all of their relationships ruined by pornography. There's nobody who wants to harbor hatred or bitterness in their heart. No one. And as fun as it might be to impulsively spend money, it's not fun being broke. And yet for so many people, we choose to live in darkness when Jesus, the light of the world, is ready to lead you out of darkness. So let me put it this way. If you want to find your way out of darkness and into the fullness of life, it requires something of you. It requires faith in Jesus. It requires you to do something. Because you can't binge watch now the operative word here is some. You can't binge watch some great programming on Netflix without a subscription or a membership. And Disney Plus is great, but there's something that you have to do before you can watch WandaVision or The Mandalorian. You have to sign up. And similarly, you can't find your way out of the darkness of your life without putting your faith and trust in the light of the world, Jesus Christ. And in this way, faith becomes like a weapon to beat back the darkness. Like the creation account in Genesis, in one moment there was nothing but darkness, but in the next there was light and life. Jesus is the light of the world. By the very nature of light, there can be no darkness where there is light. Some of you are dealing with some very dark thoughts, some very dark motives, some very dark behaviors. Some of you are in some very dark places. And because of the lies that we believe, it may be the person sitting next to you or the person with you who doesn't even know that. If you're ready to discover life and purpose and hope, then it's time to put your faith in Jesus. Jesus is explicit with his friends and followers. Listen to what he says in John chapter 8, verse 23. He says, I'm not from this world. This is why I told you that you would die in your sins. If you don't believe that I am, if you don't believe that I am the light of the world, you will die in your sins. Sin is the epitome of darkness. It is the proof of darkness in our heart and in this world. Jesus says that sin and darkness lead to death because darkness, if you remember, darkness is devoid of life. But if you believe, if you have faith in the light of the world, then you'll find life and purpose and hope. Faith then is the greatest weapon to push back the forces of darkness in your heart, in your life, and in this world. If you've never put your faith and trust in the light of the world, Jesus, I'd love to introduce you to him today. Carl at our Washington campus would love to introduce you to him today. Our online host would love to introduce you to Jesus as the light of the world today, for you to put your faith in Jesus and to keep from the darkness. Travis, I've done that. I put my faith in Jesus long ago. I was 7 years old. I gave my life to him. Oh, hey, I've done that. I've been living faithfully. But I'm still struggling with a little bit of darkness in my life. Faith is a weapon. And it's not just a one-time faith either. Listen, those of you who are married, you didn't pledge to be faithful to your spouse once before your family and friends. No. You pledge to be faithful to your spouse every day, demonstrating what they mean to you, how much you honor your relationship and your commitment to one another. That happens every day. It's not just that monumental faith moment that we all need in life, that monumental faith moment in Jesus that keeps you from darkness. Every person here joining us knows that darkness is always present in our lives and in this world. But to resist it, to beat it back, we must continue to put our faith in Jesus and in him alone as the light of the world, believing that every single day. How do we keep from the darkness? Faith in the light of the world, faith in Jesus. The second way we keep from darkness is following Jesus. Jesus is very explicit about this and what we must do. He says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. If we follow Jesus, we don't have to worry about walking in darkness. It's impossible to follow the light of the world and still find yourself in darkness. One of the most life-giving groups that I'm a part of here in Eastern North Carolina is a group called F3. It's Fitness, Fellowship, and Faith. It's an organization for men where we get together for free workouts at about 5:30 every morning, most mornings. It's ridiculously early. Sometimes I'm questioning my life decisions when I'm there at 5:30 in the morning. But one of the things that is true of working out at 5:30 in the morning is that it's always dark. And now that we changed times, it's really dark at 5:30. And on this one particular morning that I was posting at a running group, we were told about what our 45-minute running route was going to be. And I had heard and knew that it was going to be taking us down this heavily wooded path on a greenway. And when everybody else learned of this, these guys came prepared. They got out their headlamps and began putting their headlamps on in order to be able to have the light that they needed for the path. I didn't have a headlamp. And frankly, the thought of running in the darkness just really made me uncomfortable. And so as we took off and as we entered the pitch black path, I found myself running behind one of the guys wearing a headlamp. I couldn't see past him. Because it wasn't my light. But I trusted that he could see the path and that if I just followed him, I would stay safe and I would stay on the path. What I didn't think about ahead of time, but I found to be true, is that over time, my cadence, my pace, and my motion began to be in sync with the one ahead of me, the one with the light. I believe that's the illustration that Jesus offers here is when he says, hey, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. If you want to keep from darkness, follow the light of the world. Following Jesus keeps you from darkness. Following means, though, constant and intentional pursuit. It's intentionally doing the things that Jesus did. It's intentionally living the way that Jesus lived and honoring God in every aspect of your life. What does that mean? What does following Jesus mean practically? Following Jesus means embracing forgiveness over bitterness, letting go of what he or she said or what they did. Following Jesus means pursuing purity over lust. Following Jesus means encouraging and inspiring your kids, not criticizing them, belittling them, or putting them down. Following Jesus means honoring other people as better than yourself, putting their needs above your own. Following Jesus means surrounding yourself with people who make wise decisions. Following Jesus means being generous, not selfish, and it means demonstrating grace even when people don't deserve it. Following Jesus, following the light, keeps us from the darkness of sin, the darkness from our hearts, and the darkness of our world. And there's a guarantee in it, if you didn't catch it, that I don't want you to miss. Whoever follows me won't have to walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That's a promise that you can trust in. If you're willing to follow Jesus, you will be kept from the darkness, because that's the beauty of following the light of the world. There's somebody here today, maybe you're joining us in Washington, that you came in struggling with a little bit of darkness. Your life is lacking purpose and hope. Maybe you're caught up in some things that you never set out to do. You're feeling lost. You're desiring something greater and better. Maybe you're struggling with a little bit of shame over agony over something that you did, or you've bought into a lie that's keeping you in a bad place. It's holding you back. Listen, you're not alone. We're not alone in this. Jesus' closest friend John wrote a story about a woman who was caught up in a way of living that she didn't desire for herself. This particular woman was caught in adultery, and she is brought before Jesus. In fact, it says that she is dragged by religious leaders before Jesus. They demand that she be stoned to death because that's what the law required. I think that that's proof that you can be religious and walk in darkness, because being religious and following Jesus are often two different things. But in a remarkable turn of events, as this woman in her brokenness is there before Jesus, he bends down and he writes something in the dirt. And as he's doing this, the religious leaders begin to crowd around to see what it is that he had written. And when he gets done writing, he looks up to those religious leaders and he says to them, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone." And this is what happens next, according to John's writing. Those who heard him went away one by one, beginning with the elders, meaning all of her accusers abandoned their cause. Finally, only Jesus and the woman were left in the middle of the crowd. And Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, don't sin anymore." Listen, Jesus is very clear about who he is, what he came to do, and why it matters to you and to me. He says, "I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me won't walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Jesus is the light of the world, meaning in a world of tragedy and violence, death, destruction, and darkness, God sent his son, Jesus, to offer life, purpose, and hope. It is a recreation of the story from Genesis, except now the light isn't something that just separates dark day from night. It's something that offers life and purpose and hope. The world is forever changed by the person of Jesus. But check this out. As a broken and shameful woman kneels before Jesus, he says to her, "I don't condemn you." And in that moment, Jesus is not only the light of the world, he is the light of her world. And I don't know what kind of darkness you may be struggling with today, whether it's in an immense darkness or whether it's just a little bit of darkness. But Jesus can be the light of your world too. The good news is that when you believe that Jesus is the I am, when you believe those words, "I am the light of the world," it becomes personal. He's not this out there kind of God. He becomes your God. He becomes the one, your personal light. And when you know that, you receive freedom from all of the condemning voices of the world. The voice of the enemy that tells you that you can't or you won't or that you never will is silenced in the presence of his grace and goodness, who says, "I am the light of the world. And whoever follows me will never walk in darkness again." Listen, looking back on my childhood fear, it was foolish that I was so afraid of the darkness. It was just silly that I feared what was in the darkness. But something that I learned then that I practice today that's not foolishness is this: run toward the light. Run toward the light. If you want to keep from darkness, have faith in Jesus. If you want to keep from darkness, follow Jesus. So Jesus, we thank you that you are the light of the world, that in you there can be no darkness. And we confess that we struggle with darkness in our lives. Whether it's big ways or small ways, we're always trying to fight back the darkness. And this morning, we just want to ask you to come and to be our light, to put our faith in you, trusting that there can be no darkness in you, no wicked way, no sin, no shame. That as we come to you, that you take away all of that condemnation and that shame, that we can be new creations today. We give you thanks for the ways that you light up our world, our hearts, give life to our souls, and purpose and hope and meaning to the life that we live today and a hope for an eternity tomorrow. So thank you for who you are, for not only being the light of the world, but for being the light of our world, my world today. May it change us in profound ways so that we might be a light to others. Jesus, we love you. We love you. And thank you for who you are as the light of the world. Amen.
For service times, To find out how to take your next step with Jesus, or just to learn how you can get involved, head on over to covenant.cc or follow us on social media. We hope to see you soon.